everybody! Today I am going to be doing a review and demo with the Mungyo Water-Soluble Oil Pastels. I picked up this set of 24 colors at Jerry's Artorama for around $10. I will put a link to this product down below. So the reason that I'm doing 3 swatches on this paper is because I'm going to show 3 different ways that you can blend this product. I also have the product swatches up on white watercolor paper at the top, just in case you were wondering what they looked like on a white paper compared to this tone tan sketch paper. I wanted to use this tan sketch paper today because that's what I will be using for the demo coming up, where I do a landscape painting. These pastels work really well on watercolor paper. I did a little painting with them the other day on watercolor paper, but I usually prefer to use pastels on a toned paper, so I was just curious how they would react on something that's a little bit lighter weight. The first way that I am going to blend these pastels is just using water on a regular paintbrush. What I quickly learned with these is that you just want your paintbrush to be damp. You don't want it to be sopping wet or carrying any amount of water like you would if you were using watercolor paints, because these pastels will become diluted out very quickly and the brush will remove a lot of the pigment from the paper. Once you get used to using a brush that is just a little bit damp, these do blend very well. They don't have as streak-free of a finish as normal watercolors would, but you can get them to be pretty smooth and relatively opaque. And they are easy to build up as well, especially if you let the first layer dry before you apply more pastel on top. The second way that I'm blending these is with a baby wipe. I really don't prefer this method. I find that the wipes will very easily remove a lot of the pigment, and it's very hard to control how you're blending them too. It's easy to kind of get some fuzzy edges and smudges using a wipe, so this is probably not a method I would use very often with these. The last tool that I'm going to use is this little clay shaper tool. I chose this over a blending stump because I felt like if you were adding water to a piece and using these pastels as they were intended, that could get to be kind of messy, and a blending stump might really soak up a lot of the product. It would be hard to sand it off like you would if you were just using regular pastels. So I blended them with this little silicone end on this shaping tool, and it blends well with this. It is a little bit streaky. You kind of have to play around with your pressure a little bit, but it does work. I think that water and a brush is definitely my preferred method for blending these, and again, just being conscious of how much water my brush is carrying and making sure that it's not too wet. So now I will give you just a little bit closer view so you can see a little better for yourselves how the different methods worked in blending these pastels. So for today's demo, I'm going to do a painting from this picture that I took when I was in Hawaii. I thought that a landscape picture would work well with this medium. I'm going to start by first laying the colors into the sky. I'll be using 3 different tones of blue to create a little bit of a gradient in certain areas, and then adding some white and gray tones in for the clouds. I particularly love doing landscapes that have a really majestic sky, because I think that a lot of times the sky is really what makes or breaks a landscape picture. And the clouds in this one are just so beautiful, and it was such a crisp, clear day and warm breeze. So I'm going to do my best to capture the beauty of this landscape, and at the same time just kind of playing around with these water-soluble pastels, and I'm definitely still in the process of figuring out how they work. They really are kind of their own creature, because unlike watercolor, you're not laying down your lightest washes first and then working into the darker tones. I've really been kind of finding that more similar to how you would work in pastels, laying down a little bit of everything and even more of the mid and darker tones first, and then blending those together and continuing to add highlights in places and deeper tones in other places. But at the same time, they really do have a wonderful water-soluble quality. They blend out and move around very similar to how watercolor, maybe even gouache would be a better comparison. how that would flow. As I mentioned earlier, it is definitely harder to get a streak-free finish with these than it is with watercolor, but they do blend out relatively smooth, and I'm sure the more familiar I became with them and the more I use them, the more that would improve as well. The other thing that I have learned about these in the little bit that I have used them is that when you thin them out with water, they do dry to be a little less vibrant than what they appear to be when they are wet. So they are very similar to a lot of brands of watercolor in that way, as I believe watercolors generally dry about 20% lighter than what they appear to be when they're wet. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that as you're laying down pigment, you want to add a little more maybe than what you think you'll need so that you get that vibrant effect after it's done drying. As I'm continuing to paint with these, I really love how creamy they are, how easily they lay down pigment. And I really think that these are going to be something that I continue to come back to and play around with and try out some different subjects in my paintings and see how they work. As for my paper choice, it seemed to hold up pretty well with the first layer of pastels and water, but as I continued to add more layers and do more blending, I could tell that the paper was not holding up as well as I would have liked. It started to warp just a little bit. There were some areas that got a little bit soft. I could tell that I was starting to kind of work through the paper to damage the paper. So if you're planning on doing a really detailed work or something with a lot of layers, I would definitely recommend using either watercolor paper or just something heavier than this. I believe this paper is 80 pounds, so it's definitely not made to handle a lot of water. And by the time that I got to the end of the painting, because I did some heavier applications of pastel in the bottom half and I used a little more water, so by the time I got to the end and let that all dry, the paper was very warped and I wasn't very happy with that. So I will not be using this paper again with these water-soluble pastels. I am really curious to try these pastels out on a watercolor canvas because I think that the texture and the tooth of a canvas would work so well with these pastels. It would allow for your layering and thicker applications. The canvas would hold up to as much water as you would want to put on it. And I think that it would just be really the ideal surface to work on with these pastels. So as far as the painting, I am just adding in all of the different tones that I can see back in those hills or mountains. And not that I see them all as I'm putting them down, but I'm just putting them down in the general locations that I can see the tones. And then I'm really going to do a lot of blending on this because those colors are very subtle. There's not, bright green or bright purple within those mountains. So blending those in with the black and the brown will tone them down a little and just give that illusion of a little bit of color hiding in those hills. After I did a couple of wash layers in the sky, I also went back in with the pastels and just added some little kind of scribbly marks to show some wispiness to the clouds. That part of the painting got cut off when I was filming, but hopefully you're able to kind of understand the process of how it came to look that way. And then I lost a bunch more of my painting process because my camera was just acting up for me. But I laid down a whole bunch of different earth tones and then just blended them together. And now I've added some deeper tones along the bottom that I've blended in as well. And since my mountains are dry, I am just going to go back with that light kind of earthy yellow tone and add in a few highlights on those. I continue to add some highlights to the land where the tops of the hills are using the white pastel. And then after I finish up adding some of those highlights, I am going to grab the purple pastel, and there are a few flowers that are just along the bottom where there's a fence line that runs, and I'm just going to throw in some purple and a little bit of white down there too to highlight those. So now I'm just adding in the fence posts, and then I'm going to add a few little details on the landscape to differentiate the foreground a little more from the background and put some added detail in. Overall, I would definitely recommend trying out these water-soluble pastels if they interest you. They're super affordable. At $10, I really don't think you can go wrong if you think you might be interested in trying them. If you like to work with regular oil pastels, watercolor, gouache, I think that these have some things in common with any of those other mediums, and if you're just looking for a little something different to try out to take a break from whatever regular medium that you're used to working in, I think that these definitely have something to offer. So that concludes my review and demo of the Mungyo water-soluble oil pastels. I really enjoyed working with these today. As I mentioned, this is only my second painting that I've done with these, so I'm looking forward to trying them out some more, picking up some watercolor canvas and giving that a shot. And I hope that you guys found this useful today. I upload new videos with different art content here on YouTube every week, so if that's something you're interested in, be sure to subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you again soon.